But the fact that it's not going to go biosimilar until I see more evidence from Dr. Reddy's, and we can go look at Dr. Reddy's financials and see, I bet you that this drug's going nowhere fast. And it'll just be this $3.5 billion cash cow for Bristol. Yeah, why not? That's how we'll do it. You can take a risk-adjusted approach and maybe in 2031 just start dropping it by 10% because, you know, there might be other drugs that come out. It might go generic. But you can see that for the long tail, all these other drugs are kind of going to go away, whereas Orencia is going to stick around. Maybe I should be a little more charitable to some of these guys. What do you guys think? Okay, so will Orencia go generic or not? Important for Bristol. Not the end of the world, but if you do a discount of these cash flows, like, it's a lot. It's actually a lot. So let's say you discount it 7%, because this is like money is as good as gold. These people have been on Orencia for 10, 15, 20 years. They're not going to stop taking the drug. So there's no risk to this cash flow. It's just pure cash flow. It's actually a big deal. You're talking about $20 billion of discounted cash flow. So if it went biosimilar, so that's $25 billion, right? So let's say it went biosimilar next year or 2 years from now or whatever, and they would split the market immediately, I'd say 50-50, but at a lower price point. So you'd be looking at a pretty sick decline there. And let's do the NPV of that. I don't know how I did it with the last one, but that's 12 billion. Oh yeah, it's not even including the first three, so technically yeah, 9 billion or 25 billion. Big difference, right? It's not, in the scheme of things, going to really make or break Bristol-Myers, but it's good to know. You know, a lot of people on Wall Street say, oh, it's a driver for the stock. I need to know the drivers for the stock. Yes, that's very important. But how much is the portfolio worth is important too. So we've looked at this point, and evaluated pretty carefully, I think, their five biggest drugs. The other drugs are very important as well, but we also have to look at their pipeline. How do you know which? So we'll look at the other drugs too, but let's take a break to look at the pipeline. Some of their drugs just came out, so like you can almost view them as pipeline drugs. Like this drug, Sotyktu, really, really important drug, could become a really big seller. I would put Camzyos in the same category. And we're just going to have to sort of see where Bristol-Myers is in research. So how do we do that? It's really hard. I have some older drugs here, but KarXT is probably going to be their biggest new drug. How many billions will this sell is going to really be the major question for Bristol-Myers. Now, what's KarXT? Well, they just bought a company that had this drug called Karuna. And they spent a lot of money to buy Karuna. And this is kind of the issue with Bristol-Myers, is that they're spending tons of money buying these companies. What are they going to get out of them? That's the question. And it seems like they're not doing great deals. I hate to say it, but I said it. It seems like they're not doing great deals. The Celgene deal wasn't that great. Well, there's the subcutaneous nivolumab. So that's the effort to kind of move nivolumab from biosimilar IV to subcutaneous. If they can get people to take the subcutaneous, that's a good life cycle management plan. And we don't really give them any credit for that. We just assume that IVs will happen for Opdivo, and there's no way around it. The drug will go to 0. But if they offer a subcutaneous shot, they might be able to move some business there. And maybe we should account for that. Let's account for that. Like this. Yeah, so how big can this drug get? Here's the completion of Karuna. 12 though? Roughly $12 billion. They paid to buy Karuna for 12 billion cash money. PDUFA, September, that's the FDA approval date. It's very likely to be approved. That's just, shit, I mean, that's just a month from now. We're gonna have the first new type of schizophrenia drug, maybe 40 years. That's pretty cool. That's gonna sell. That might be a $10 billion plus drug. And this is where the creativity and the intellect are gonna kind of show. Everything we've done up to this point is fairly dry. I mean, took a little bit of industry knowledge, a little bit of intellect. But what we're gonna do here is gonna be really important. It's gonna kind of be the delta in the analysis. And you might ask, why not do that first? Well, I could have done it first for sure, but I just want to get my feet wet and remind myself what all of the assets of Bristol and the basic landscape of it. And then now that we're comfortable with that, we're gonna look into more detail. So yeah, 14 billion actually, $14 billion deal, 12.7 net deal. So huge deal, but probably could be a good product. Now, looking into this is going to require us to really understand the landscape for that specific disease and that specific market. And there are many drugs that are trying to compete with this market. I'm going to make a new little sheet for KarXT. KarXT. What is it? Xanolamine, I think is the name of the drug. It's surprising they don't have well, it's not surprising they don't have a new brand name. They'll have one very soon. But they just call it KAR, Karuna XT. I don't even know if that's how you say it. But the mechanism of action is really important here. And it was really surprising that this thing worked. And so I just want to get xanolamine and trospium. And both drugs are off patent. So this is going to be like kind of an issue for this company, because without a patent, you're sort of in trouble. But basically what's fascinating is you have muscarinic receptors in your body and in your brain. And what they do in your body is very different from what they do in your brain. And the M1, M4 agonists, for your brain, they seem to reduce schizophrenia, which is great. But in the periphery, they're going to cause side effects. What they do is they give trospium, which only, because of its chemical properties, only stays in the periphery, which is everywhere but the brain, and it counteracts it by blocking those receptors. It's kind of genius chemistry. But the problem is, trospium is a super old drug, and xanolamine is an old Lilly drug that's been off patent forever. So, how long will this drug really last? Now, you get 5 years no matter what if it's a new molecule. So we know they'll get 5 years, but you don't want a drug just for 5 years. You want it for a decade, ideally, maybe more. If it's a biologic, you get even more years. But that's the big question with karuna. Now, this is where kind of like our little launch thing is actually useful. So we can kind of plan out, okay, well, what launch could this look like? Could this be like one of these or bigger? I would argue this drug is gonna be a monster. This could be one of the biggest drugs ever. Schizophrenia is a weird disease. A lot of people don't understand it. There's about 1 million schizophrenics in the US. They take D2 antagonists. So D2 antagonists, probably the most popular one is called Risperdal, but there's another one called Abilify. Maybe Abilify is more popular, but there was Zyprexa, Haldol, many others. And actually, we can look at Johnson & Johnson's schizophrenia medicines as an example. Should be able to beat those, right? And those drugs hit several billion. In fact, we could just go look at our J&J model. And this is why I recommend people who want to become professional investors, they stick to one sector. Because the things you learn from one company will maybe teach you about another company. If you know how transistors work for Intel, they work the same way for NVIDIA. You don't have to learn brand new stuff. But if you do biopharma and you do semiconductors, you're going to have to learn a lot of stuff. So it's about a $4 billion medicine for J&J. But it took a while for J&J to sort of penetrate that market. Yeah, this could be a really big drug. Let me take the first brush strokes. Make a happy little trees here in a second. For me, it's happy little billions I draw in, like Bob Ross. Let me just draw in some billions. So the last 3 months of 2024 won't matter that much, but maybe I'll do 200. Put a little 1.5 billion here. Maybe 3 billion here. 4 billion, 5 billion. I'll just put that down there as the base. We can analyze and shift as we see fit. But the tragedy, maybe it's not tragedy. To me, it's a tragedy. Elizabeth Warren didn't like it when I said this, or was it Bernie Sanders? One of those idiots didn't like it when I said, every time a drug goes generic, I cry a little tear. I get sad. It's very emotional for me because all those profits were so great. Yeah, I would say there's an impressive amount of evidence that all in-depth research is worthwhile, but we can argue over efficient markets some other time. So will they get 5 years or more? We can look at, this question has been asked many times. So where do we find the answer? We can actually look at SEC filings again. So what we do here is we're going to look at a company that they acquired, which is called Karuna. So Karuna was public, right? And they had their own 10Qs and 10Ks. And in one of those, they must have talked about, okay, here's what we thought our intellectual property would be. And look at this amazing company, Karuna. They basically started it for nothing, and they turned it into a $14 billion acquisition by Bristol-Myers. They basically turned $1 million into $14 billion. That's why you do this research. Because maybe you'll buy Bristol-Myers for a low price and put in your 401k. Maybe you'll be wrong. But you may be able to put the pieces together in your head and how to do that yourself. There are channel checks in biopharma. I'll explain that maybe sometime later. All right, so here's the Karuna 10K. This is before the Bristol-Myers acquisition. Let's look at intellectual property. see if there's a place they discuss this. And I'll Google patent as well. They raised about $1 billion. So they started the company 15 years ago. They raised $1 billion along the way and sold for $14 billion. Pretty cool. They paid Lilly $100,000 for this drug, and now they sold it to Bristol-Myers for $14 billion. That's what it's all about. Vivek, myself, these are the deals that make dreams come true. $100,000. Unbelievable. It's interesting, they're not talking much about patents as far as I can tell here. Okay, there's something here. Twenty 2030 expiry without PTE. So these patents will be challenged basically right away. And 2030 isn't that much further, right? 2030 expiry regardless. So I might do the easy thing here. Well, they could get patent term restoration. That's without PTE, but PTE is only a couple of years. So what's interesting is this part of the curve is important, but we know that after, say, 2032 or maybe 2033, that things will get really bad there. They do have some other nonsense patents for 2040 or something like that, but you can never trust these things. In biopharma, and in other industries, companies try to dress up their patents and pretend that they're useful. But the problem is that's just not how patents work. And we'll see if I can show you. Okay. Okay, this is interesting. So this is a Chinese patent. I don't want to look at that. No offense. Okay, this is a global patent. So this is an interesting patent because it's a composition of xanolamine, which is well known, and trospium. And then this thing, what's this thing? The hell is this? Is it this is anolamine? Looks like it. It's amazing. It says schizophrenia affects 0.5 to 1% of the population, so that would be more than 1 million people in the US. Patents are also very good in the sense that they teach you quite a bit about the industry if you read them. Okay, so this is the plurality of xanolamine beads, which this is particle size, I suppose. Half a millimeter. The beads are half a millimeter. I don't know that that's gonna work as a patent. Sometimes you can win on a formulation patent, but it's fairly rare. Okay, so I don't think that formulation patent's going to go very far. I'm curious if it looks like they maybe invented a new drug. I wonder if they put this into the clinic. Either way, the drug that's getting approved does not have a good patent situation. Well, the most important thing in patents is something called prior art. If somebody invented something like your invention before, it's not an invention anymore. That's the general idea of prior art. Okay, so they were developing other muscarinics, but those follow-on drugs may or may not have been getting close to phase 1. What's interesting here is the is you have some of the clinical data here. Very impressive. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw this data. This is PANSS positive and negative symptom scale. So this is how you measure schizophrenia. The higher, the more symptoms you have. Positive symptoms are ones that the mind creates, like hallucinations. Negative symptoms are ones that are taken away from the mind, like cognition or slurred speech or disordered thoughts. So this reduces, it seems like it reduces the positive symptoms and the negative symptoms. Most of the schizophrenia drugs now just reduce the negative symptoms. I'm sorry, the positive symptoms. So the fact that it could also reduce negative symptoms is a big win. This is going to be a huge drug. I just don't know that it's going to last very long. And again, we can kind of split the baby, but I'd rather make a call. But since we're so the patents they have are not very good. And even if they were good, they still expire in 2030. And even if they get extended, the worst they could expire is 2032. So basically, and it's a small molecule, so when it goes away, it's going to go away bad. So basically, we can kind of forecast the end of the curve. And you're just doing an NPV of like these years. The only question is, are we going to get, well, let's assume we get 5 years. What's the NPV of that? And again, not much discount rate because, well, this is 4 years. So we're going to get like half of that year, or most of that year. So that's 13 billion. And what's funny is this is exactly what Bristol paid for the drug. We were talking about efficient markets earlier. It's 14 billion in revenue. Well, they paid $14 billion for it, so it kind of makes sense, right? But let's say it keeps going, which I think maybe they'll get another year or two. And then maybe it gets even, goes a little further. Now you're talking about 28 billion. Well, it's going to cost them some money to sell the drug, by the way, so it's not going to be 100% margin. But that might make more sense. Now, what if it's a much bigger drug than that? Let's go ham. Let's see. Year 2, you rarely see 3 billion. So I have a pretty big year 2 here. It would be like one of the biggest ever. Well, Mounjaro hit 6 bill. So that's possible. And then year 3, I got 4 billion down. It's very rare for drugs to hit 4 billion in year 3, but Opdivo did, Keytruda did, Ozempic did, Mounjaro will. And then year 5, I have 6 billion. So I'm sort of forecasting it will be, or I have 5 billion. I'm forecasting it'll be one of the biggest drugs of all time. But I still wonder if I'm not forecasting enough. Which is kind of crazy, right? As weird as these estimates look, just like $1 billion a year for 9 years, except for the first year, which is 1.5, and the next year is 3, and then it's $1 billion each year. It's probably accurate. It's funny, this $28-29 billion number is like the largest any individual drug company goes for. Like, remember Pharmacyclics kind of went for a similar amount? It's kind of like the cap of any drug startup. It's like 29 billion. Of course, these guys sold for 14. But do you remember Pharmasad as well? Also sold for around 14. Okay. I think like the people that took xanolamine from Eli Lilly for 100K and sold it for 14 billion, it's kind of an amazing thing. It's not once in a lifetime, but, well, for those people it's once in a lifetime, but I would say a deal like that happens every year in biopharma, And if you follow the industry close enough, you can see where those opportunities are. Yeah, right? President Harris is going to say, no more patent for Bristol-Myers. This drug belongs to the people. Okay, so maybe that's KarXT for now. Or xanolamine, I should call it, really. So that's their big drug. I would agree that it's very hard to beat the market. You would have to be basically a professional, meaning that your whole life is dedicated to investing. And even then, most of the people who have that job don't beat the market. So it's a competitive field. It's kind of like MMA or boxing. Like, you could be a professional boxer and still have a less than 50% win rate, and you're a professional boxer. Look at the NBA. Look at the worst team in the NBA. My hometown team is pretty bad, the Knicks. The people who play for the New York Knicks are amazing basketball players. They're some of the best in the world. But they still have a terrible winning percentage compared to great teams like Golden State or something like that. So even professionals can be not good professionals relative to their rivals. We sometimes say, oh, those guys are bums. Well, they're not bums. They're amazing basketball players. They're some of the best of the best. But there's others that are still better. Wall Street's the same way. There are people that make billions of dollars on Wall Street, and there are people that struggle, and they don't do that great. And just to get on Wall Street requires some pretty deep dedication to success. But then to prevail and succeed on Wall Street, it's very, very difficult. Okay, let's keep looking. Yeah, I could beat the Knicks by myself. The Knicks suck, man. I used to watch Patrick Ewing, Allen Houston, John Starks. All right, so again, they're kind of focusing on subcutaneous nivolumab, anticipated launch of KarXT, which we talked about a second ago. Okay, cendakimab. Let's look at cendakimab. There it is. IL-13 inhibitor. This thing got approved. Like, for example, the deal they did to buy Turning Point, I think is going to end up being a really crappy deal. They have some cell therapy, like Brazani. Looks like Brazani's starting to sell okay. But this drug, Sotyktu, is going to be the most important, I would argue. Sotyktu's off to a slow start, though. Let's see if they have a website for their pipeline. Usually they do. Bristol is like a really focused pipeline. Like, a lot of these other drug companies have decided to like spray and pray. They're like really, really focused on a very small handful of opportunities. Like, you can antifucosal GM1. Relatlimab. I think relatlimab is dead. Or is that the... That might be actually be approved. Yeah, okay, that's the LAG-3. I think it's dead for other indications, perhaps. CCR8 everyone has, SHP2 everyone has, PRMT5 everyone has, SOS1 everyone has. I suppose the Mirati G12D drug could be big, but Mirati, a lot of people shit on that drug. Iberdomide, I wonder if that thing's ever going to get approved. Then there's mezigdomide. Then they have this other CAR T, another CAR T. Golcadomide, another IMID. These are kind of well-known drugs. This one kind of interesting. So TYK2 is, like I said, the kind of big opportunity drug. Good night. LPA1 antagonist. These are kind of interesting. I wonder what those are. Okay, Alzheimer's, major opportunity. TYK2 for neuroinflammation, that could be like depression or something like that. That'd be really interesting. TRPC4 and C5. It doesn't feel like they have too much going on in neuroscience. And then they still are developing milvexian, which is kind of like a new clotting drug. Pipeline kind of sucks. A lot of the drugs they have, other than KarXT, a lot of the drugs they have, they kind of already launching and growing. So like, Sprycel's going generic. It should be very soon, but it's taking forever. Reblozyl is going to be a really big drug. Yervoy, the question is the same as Orencia. Will there be a biosimilar? And we can kind of take stabs at all of these really quickly. I hate Yervoy. I think it's the worst drug. Like, I never understood why anybody gives it. It's like totally useless. But Reblozyl, I don't know. I love this medicine. It's like such a great drug. Opdualag, I wonder how the community sees that drug. Camzyos is kind of really bizarre. It had this little like lull. But so TYK2 is really disappointing. Like, this is a slow launch. This is a really slow launch, and this was supposed to be like a really big drug. So maybe they can pick it up, but the autoimmune space is like super competitive. I don't know if they're gonna make it. I mean, look at Orencia. It took forever, but it ended up becoming $3 billion. So it's okay if it takes its time. Krazati, I guess it'll look like that Amgen drug as well. This drug's not going to be very big. And then KarXT is basically starts here, and then this is, yeah. Okay, so we can take a first stab at valuation. Sometimes I want to look at these numbers really carefully before I do the calculation for valuation, because I kind of don't want to bias myself into thinking, oh, wow, that's way too big or way too small. But, let's take a look. So you can see this is sometimes called a runoff model in insurance. And I think it's really valuable to do in biopharma, because runoff just means that basically these drugs will expire and they won't be replaced really by other medicines. Let me just fill these out real quick. Okay. And so with the runoff model, you can get a really accurate assessment, but you obviously can't predict what the company's going to do in the early stage pipeline, if that makes sense. Okay. All right, so it's roughly a 75% gross margin, and that's with Eliquis, which is really low margin. So they'd probably be around 80% margin without Eliquis, so keep that in mind. They'll still gonna have Eliquis for a little while, but it's something important to kind of keep in mind. I have to fill out this quarters, but let's just assume, well, let's try 75. Although, wasn't it 79 a second ago? Yeah. Maybe leave it at 79. Okay. And then we'll just do R&D 1% growth. Okay. Same thing with R&D and MS&A. They have a little bit of interest income, which I'm gonna ignore for now. Taxes kind of normalize around 20%. Looks like there was a one-time item here. That's probably not going to recur. Okay, so they're making around $4 billion a quarter, so call it $16 billion a year, and it's actually super cheap if you think about it that way. But a lot of these drugs are going generic, so let's keep looking. It's like the moment of truth is coming. Okay. I basically like to exclude R&D because R&D is a cost for future benefit, and we're doing a runoff model, so there's no future benefit. So we're just going to do MS&A. And what's nice about Bristol is that they cater to these really specialized disease categories, which don't require tons of salespeople. And they used Pfizer to go after the Eliquis, which did require a lot of salespeople. One really important piece here is that they are in a net debt position, which I'm going to try to forecast what that looks like. So they're 45 billion net debt. So like I said, they're pretty levered up to get KarXT and these other things. Xanolamine. Stop calling it that. Okay, so there'll be 19 debt at the end of 25. So they'll kind of be cash flow back in positive cash in a couple of years, assuming this outcome, which is obviously not set in stone. In fact, I can guarantee you it's actually not going to be what happens. And for the forecast, what I'd like to do is do some maturity, which I'm going to put at -1%, some ROIC, which is their return on capital, and then a discount rate. Discount rate's pretty low in pharma. Let's start with the maturity. And so this is basically what is the cash flow after 2035. And it goes on forever, right? It's going to be 100 years from now. Bristol-Myers will still be around, just as Coca-Cola and Philip Morris and those companies are. So we're going to take the NPV starting from the end of 25, I guess, or starting with 2025. And we're going to use the discount rate, of course. And then, yeah, go from here to there. And we get 172 billion, which is amazing. And then we still are not done yet, actually, because we have to take the cash and get some return on that, which isn't too big. This is kind of where management genius is evaluated. I'm putting that pretty low for Bristol-Myers right now, although the KarXT deal might show them that they're actually smart. But, and you know, they did the luspatercept deal was pretty smart. So sometimes they get them right, but I think they look at they paid 3 or 4 billion for this cash flow stream, which may, you know, it's going to end up being a little bit more than this, but that was a really bad deal. I'm not sure they're going to get their money back on Mirati either. So they are kind of hit or miss on M&A, in my opinion. But I'm getting a pretty high stock price, although one of the things to keep in mind here is that that's the NPV of the business, but you still do have to take out the cash and add the debt. So the real NPV, or vice versa actually, add the cash you have and then subtract the debt you would have to pay off if you were to acquire this whole company. And so the share price you would get is actually the current stock price, or a little bit higher, I guess. It's trading at 49 right now. This is also a somewhat conservative viewpoint in the sense that a runoff model is about as bad as it gets. This is basically like shutting down Bristol-Myers. So 37% upside, not much. And that's almost like within our error bound. Like, because if I bump this to 8%, for example, you basically have the current stock price. But it does seem on the cheaper side of things. And I'm really not valuing any other pipeline assets, and they definitely have a few that are going to make it. Not that many. So there's a little optionality there. But unless xanolamine is going to be a $10 or $15 billion drug pretty early, which I don't think will happen, or so TYK2 all of a sudden like upticks pretty heavy. Like so TYK2 could do really, really well. But like I said, it's kind of been a bit of a dog. If it just starts all of a sudden like kicking ass, which just doesn't seem likely. Bristol doesn't have, I mean, they have an immunology business, so I don't know why it's not doing so great. I have to look at the data. Let's say so TYK2 does really, really great. Something like this. You know, the NPV is a little higher. So, and that might happen. And then you have like Yervoy and Orencia biosimilars, which are a big question. Can Reblozyl get bigger? If possible, for sure. Can the cell therapy drugs get bigger? Can Camzyos outperform? I think this is sort of conservative. It's as close to accurate as I can get, but it's a little on the conservative side. So I think Bristol is probably a decent long, but I hope this gave you a good sense for like how I would model a big pharma company. And obviously we don't have all day to do this. I give you guys a couple of hours of what a bare bones examination, but like theoretically, like you would look into each drug really carefully and with tons of details. Yeah, sorry about the volume. I'm streaming on my Mac and it just doesn't have great volume. But yeah, it's an okay long. So TYK2 would have to sort of pick up for me to be really excited. And then maybe the cell therapy stuff would have to pick up as well. And then the launch of xanolamine would have to just be a monster, which I think it will be. I mean, it's but a bigger monster than this, which is not going to be easy. I mean, I would love to sell this drug. I mean, it's definitely going to change the game for schizophrenia, which is a really big market. So like these numbers could be really conservative. And if you get the sense or you get the early read that like this is going to be bigger than we thought, like imagine something like this happens. You're looking at quite a bit of upside. So if xanolamine and so TYK2 sales execution really pick up, you could definitely see some real upside here. But that's kind of the only scenario where there's a big win. And you saw my numbers for the other scenarios where it's more close to fairly valued. So it's kind of an easy long just because like you kind of can't lose. You know, even if the upside stuff doesn't happen, you're kind of stuck with this boring large cap pharma stock, which, you know, if you have the extra room in your portfolio, why not? But if they all of a sudden start executing really well, you know, you could see some decent upside. But at the end of the day, most of these big pharma stocks are going to be pretty boring. You know, none of them are going to be that exciting, except for maybe, you know, an occasional one like Eli Lilly or an occasional one like Novo Nordisk. But typically, these are fairly boring stocks. It's better to look at them so that you can look at other companies. You know, you might want to sell a company to Bristol-Myers. You might want to buy one of their old drugs so that you can flip it for a huge amount to another company. But it's important to look at these companies just to get a good sense for them. Anyway, that's kind of where I'm at with Bristol-Myers. It looks fairly cheap, but not like jump up and down and buy it tomorrow kind of thing. Like if you're looking for a low risk stock that has some potential upside, you know, it's okay. But, you know, I'd like to see how those launches go a little bit before I get really, really excited. As always, you can find these models on my GitHub. I used Godel software to help research this. If you want to check out Godel, please feel free. I created this with the hopes that I can make a better version of financial information software. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff happening there. So make sure you check out Godel.